Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, a closer look at the conflict between Israel and Iran. Also tonight, the impact that the congressional budget bill would have on local food banks. And we'll hear about NPH, the condition that led Billy Joel to cancel his upcoming tour. Those stories and more next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your public television station.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. President Trump today offered a number of ambiguous hints regarding a decision on the U.S. joining Israel's attacks on Iran's nuclear sites.
I have ideas as to what to do, but I haven't made a final. I like to make the final decision 1 second before it's due, because things change. I mean, especially with war, things change with war. It can go from one extreme to the other. War is very bad. We'll see what happens. I've been asked about it by everybody, but I haven't made a decision.
Israel's prime minister was decidedly clear about U.S. involvement, at least thus far.
I would like to thank President Trump, a great friend of the State of Israel. I thank him for standing alongside us, and I thank him for the support of the U.S. in assisting in defending the skies over Israel. We speak frequently, including last night. We had a very warm conversation. I thanked President Trump for his backing.
Other headlines: the Federal Reserve today held interest rates unchanged. This as the Fed tries to determine the effects of President Trump's shifting trade policies.
Changes to trade, immigration, fiscal, and regulatory policies continue to evolve, and their effects on the economy remain uncertain. The effects of tariffs will depend, among other things, on their ultimate level. Increases in tariffs this year are likely to push up prices and weigh on economic activity.
Powell added that despite the uncertainty, the economy is in a, quote, solid position with low unemployment to go along with the labor market at or near maximum employment. U.S. Supreme Court today voted to uphold a state ban on some medical treatments for transgender youth. The vote was 6-3, with Chief Justice John Roberts writing in the majority opinion that questions regarding medical treatments should be resolved by the people through their elected representatives in the democratic process. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, in dissent, wrote that the decision, quote, authorizes untold harm to transgender children and the parents and families who love them. And political note, the state Senate is closing in on a vote to fund improvements to Chase Field with taxpayer money. The bill would divert tax revenues generated from the stadium to pay for renovations. That tax revenue now helps fund things like education and public safety. The bill is backed by the Diamondbacks and the governor, who pushed for the measure to include a cap on how much taxpayer money can be used. The Chase Field legislation is among a slew of bills being worked on at the Capitol. Those measures include education funding and Medicaid expansion and foreign ownership of land in the state. As we mentioned, President Trump is not saying if he's made up his mind regarding U.S. airstrikes against Iran. Indeed, the president today said, quote, I may do it, I may not do it. This as the conflict between Iran and Israel continues to escalate. And joining us now is Shervin Zainalzadeh. He's from the ASU School of Politics and Global Studies. Good to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Is the U.S. getting closer to getting involved with dropping bombs in this thing?
Dropping bombs remains to be seen, but certainly the US is involved in assisting Israel with countering any kind of Iranian attacks at the moment. So there's still a stage to go when it comes to the United States' actual physical involvement in this conflict. However, there remains opportunity for diplomacy, which I'm hoping is something we'll see.
But is it closer today than it was yesterday, than it was the day before?
Every day is getting closer to some kind of solution, be that an involvement in this conflict directly by the United States or through some kind of plea for diplomacy in which all parties come together.
Iran is saying that they have I think the quote is, no choice to retaliate if the U.S. strikes. Is that real? Where would they retaliate? Bases in the Middle East?
This is something that's been discussed by Iran on numerous occasions, and obviously the United States has numerous interests in the Middle East, particularly around the Persian Gulf area. Threats have been made against those assets, and we've seen in the past, following the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the Iranians attacked a US base in the north of Iraq. So the potential is there, but hopefully, as I say, this won't arrive at this point if diplomacy can be given a chance to succeed.
What did you make of the president? Two things here. He referred to the Israeli military effort as "we," and he also called for the total evacuation of Tehran. What do we make of these statements? Is this bluster? Are these things to be taken seriously? I mean, these are words that you just don't hear.
I think the term "we" is something that may be a slip of the tongue, or essentially the United States is traditionally a very close ally of Israel, so maybe to have that in a sentence is something that might not have been a conscious choice of words. However, it's been interpreted as something quite different. Moving on to the evacuation, though, this is probably one of the most interesting points. It's caused no end of uncertainty in Tehran. People obviously are very concerned. We're talking about a very large city of around 8 to 10 million people, depending on how wide we look at it. So to evacuate a city of that proportion is very, very difficult. Many people have kind of taken to leaving the city already, but when we look at the logistics of it, it's a huge task. Many people have refused to do so. But the importance of that is what we should really look at. Is it a message to say, leave now because there's going to be some kind of consequence or risk to life? Or is it a message to try to sow some kind of instability in Iran amongst the people and the government?
Is Iran ready for that kind of instability?
Well, I would argue that it's actually unstable at the moment because of what's happening. This conflict was never really meant to happen. We were 5 rounds in of talks between the United States and Iran, albeit brokered through Oman. So it was kind of unexpected. So this sudden change of plan has really changed the game.
And Israel, obviously, what they want to accomplish is to stop the nuclear weapons program there in Iran. Can they do that, A? And B, can they do that without the U.S. help with these bunker-busting bombs?
Well, certainly, to some extent, they can certainly disrupt the nuclear program. I don't think that they have the potential to reach Iranian nuclear enrichment facilities directly themselves unless they use alternative methods. Let's not forget that these systems are run on highly technologically advanced programs and material, and Israel have proven in the past that they do have the ability to affect the Iranian nuclear program other than through weapons. And I'm talking primarily about cyber attacks and other forms of kind of trying to deal with the situation. Can they do it completely alone? I'm not really sure. I think the US is being invited by Israel to participate in this in order to use that kind of technology that the US possesses, but I'm not really sure it can be done alone.
The bunker-busting bombs, U.S. is really the only country with this technology, true?
I believe Russia has similar.
Russia has similar, okay. Yes. What is this doing to alliances in the Middle East? I mean, it's always shifting. It's always hard to figure out who's on what side and who's on the other. What are we seeing right now?
Across the Middle East, I think many countries have conveyed shock at what's happening, and everybody is just watching the events unfold. Don't forget, it's only been 6 days, 7 days now. So there's a lot of uncertainty, particularly for the Persian Gulf countries that are traditionally aligned with Iran, Qatar most notably, but others have approached Israel. There are normalization of ties now between Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates and Israel. So they're in a very difficult situation because both also enjoy reasonably good ties with Iran. But it's about what happens in the region afterwards that I think most people are concerned about, particularly when we look at logistics, security, freedom of shipping and travel. The Persian Gulf is a very important area.
I was going to ask about freedom of shipping, Straits of Hormuz, the whole 9 yards here. I mean, this could be seriously disrupted, or is this the kind of thing that will it necessarily affect those aspects of the economy?
Absolutely. Something like 25% of the world's oil flows through the Persian Gulf, as well as a major shipping hub using Dubai as a port. So the wider impact on both the region and the wider world will be huge.
U.S. impact. U.S. Check that. The impact of the U.S.'s position and alliances. We talked about that to a certain degree. But does the U.S. gain friends here? Does the U.S. gain enemies here if the U.S. starts dropping bombs on Tehran or on nuclear facilities?
I think the US can gain friends by proving that it is a leader that can bring parties to the table and negotiate diplomacy. This is what President Trump has repeatedly said, that he wants peace, that he wants a solution, that he wants a deal, in his own words. That can only be achieved by diplomacy, by coming around the table, and it's never too late to do that.
Is his unpredictability a good thing or a bad thing in a situation like this?
This situation is unpredictable in itself, so I think it's fair to say that anybody that looks at what's happening and changes their rhetoric, they're doing so because nothing is stable. This is a very, very fluctuating conflict. So I think it's normal for some change of opinions to occur.
I haven't asked about Europe. As far as the U.S. presence and the alliances with Europe, that those things are changing. We're not even sure what's going on with that, at a core level. How does this change the dynamics? Or does it?
Well, Europe's fighting a battle on two fronts. They are continually talking about the increasing threat from Russia, but this is also a very important aspect as well. So British forces have offered to fly equipment to Cyprus to assist. Further jets have been flown there. And in the past, in the previous attack that Iran and Israel came across, British jets were also responsible for the defense of Israel, in which they were seen shooting down Iranian drones. So there is some kind of global collective participation, yes. And Europe are very heavily involved.
Last question before you go. What do you expect to see next?
What I expect to see is a call for peace, a call for diplomacy, and I expect to see some of the other countries that are not necessarily involved in this conflict yet step up, along with the United States, such as India, such as China, such as Russia, particularly members of the UN Security Council, and really engage with both parties to bring this to a peaceful end as soon as possible.
Shervin Zainalzadeh, ASU, good information. Good to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Hello, I'm Scott Wolfelin. I want to thank all of you who have participated in the Protect My Public Media campaign over the last 3 months. There's more work to be done, though, and urgently so. The threat to funding of PBS stations like Arizona PBS has just been ratcheted up. The White House has sent a formal request to Congress to kill our funding for the upcoming fiscal year, funding that was already enacted by Congress and signed into law. Visit azpbs.org/mypublicmedia to learn how you can contact your representatives and make your voice heard.
There's at least one thing better than getting outside and exploring the great outdoors, and that's doing it with a furry friend. Today we're gonna hike a trail with some dogs, trek along with an adventure cat, and learn more about how to hike with our four-legged friends while keeping them safe and comfortable. Oh yeah.
Oh, that was a good one. Good boy. Sit. Sit. Shake. Shake. High five. Oh boy.
Thursday night at 7:30 on Arizona PBS.
Congress is considering a budget bill that includes nearly $300 billion in cuts from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, what used to be known as food stamps. That's a 30% cut, the largest in history. It also threatens to put a heavier burden on food banks. Ashley St. Thomas is the Director of Public Policy at the Arizona Food Bank Network. Good to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
This budget, just give me your general thoughts and we'll take it from there regarding this bill and what it does and what it means.
Yeah, in no uncertain terms, this bill or cuts of this magnitude to SNAP would increase food insecurity in Arizona and across the country. And certainly the impact would affect food banks. Demand would rise. Currently, our food banks are serving 700,000 people each month, which is record-breaking. That's higher than even during the peak months of the pandemic.
I was going to ask about comparing these times and what could happen with this bill in the pandemic. We'll get to that again in a second here. But you mentioned SNAP and I mentioned the supplemental. What is that?
SNAP is a grocery purchasing benefit that families who are low income are eligible for with other regulatory stipulations, but that's what the benefit does. And
the bill basically says what? We're cutting the benefits, we're adding to work requirements, those sorts of things? Yeah,
so it's not just en masse cut, it's structural changes to the program, which has existed in its current form since around 1964. And this would be the first time cuts of this magnitude are being discussed. And they're primarily going to be done in 3 ways. One is cost sharing with states for the first time ever. The benefits to date have been fully federally funded, but this would be the first time the state would be required to put in money for the benefits. There would be expansion of work requirements, like you said, And then a recalculation of the benefit would no longer be allowed. So ultimately, it just keeps the keeps the rate static.
Yeah, so in other words, inflation not even a factor here.
Correct, yeah, ultimately. And it doesn't take into account people's nutritional needs. Data changes all the time about how people purchase and cook food. And so the way the benefit is calculated now takes that into account, but it needs to be adapted every year, right? And so as grocery prices rise, it wouldn't adapt to that.
You mentioned cost sharing with states. Is Arizona able, willing to pick up some slack here?
It's unclear. It's unclear how this is going to work and what it means if a state can't put in what's being required of it by the federal government. That hasn't been hammered out yet. But we know that Arizona would likely be required to put in about $500 million for the first year. And if you know, you mentioned the state budget is moving forward this week, and it's kind of a non-starter at that price.
Yeah, that's an awful lot of money. Okay, so what you got, I would imagine, is a lot of folks who can't pay grocery bills, and a lot of folks who can't pay grocery bills look to food banks for assistance. How much do you see that increasing if this, as it stands, goes through?
Well, I can't give you a percentage, but I know obviously people who are participating in SNAP, they're children, they're seniors, they're people living with disabilities, they're working parents, and they're barely making ends meet, right? They need that assistance, $6 per day on average here in Arizona to make ends meet. And so when they don't have that, they turn to food banks. And like I said, our food banks are already stretched thin. And food banks are resilient, and they always find a way. They're embedded in their communities. They do everything they can, but at some point, there has to be a breaking point.
Yeah, and I imagine rural areas would get hit especially hard.
Yes, absolutely. We know that food insecurity is highest in our rural areas. Apache County has one of the highest rates in the country. And so that would be exacerbated, obviously, because retailers are far away from where people live. Transportation isn't the best, and so that's how we see that food insecurity rate high now. And with this lack of access to SNAP, it could only increase.
We've done a number of topics, a number of shows, I should say, on this particular topic in a variety of ways. This is the first time we've talked to food banks, and I always ask, are you hearing anything from federal officials, from state officials? I mean, obviously federal is what we're looking at right now, but state would have to, as I said, would have to pick up some kind of slack here. What are you hearing?
I think we're hearing what you would expect, which is that this is really devastating to our food banks and our families, our retailers, our farmers. Whether there's the political will to do something about it, I don't know.
And we always hear, as far as those who support the cuts and the rollbacks and such, that I think waste, fraud, and abuse seems to be the catchphrase right now. Do they have a point? Is there some way to tighten things up here without, again, putting families in a position where they have to go to food banks?
I think waste, fraud, and abuse, what we see most is at the high level, criminal enterprises that are basically stealing people's benefits before they even get them, before they're released to the card. We've seen it here in Arizona, we've seen it in other states, and the bill doesn't do anything to address that or to reimburse families who have that stolen from them, which is really hard to see.
Last question, Ashley. Are you optimistic at all?
That's a difficult question. I will say that food banks are nonpartisan. We work with people on both sides of the aisle, and we've seen support from people on both sides of the aisle. So I just hope that when our congressmen and state lawmakers are making their decisions, they're thinking about families who are struggling, who are just really trying to get by.
Ashley St. Thomas, again, Arizona Food Bank Network. It's good to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm Amna Nawaz. Tonight on the NewsHour, why the Supreme Court is upholding a state ban on transgender care. That's coming up at 6 on Arizona PBS.
Singer-songwriter Billy Joel canceled his upcoming tour after being diagnosed with a rare type of dementia called normal pressure hydrocephalus, or NPH. To learn more about NPH, we welcome Dr. Frank Lavecchio from Valleywise Health and ASU's College of Health Solutions. All right, Doctor, good to see you again. Thanks for joining us. What is NPH?
Well, normal pressure hydrocephalus is this swelling that involves the brain, and it goes really, really, really slowly, and your ventricles, which are part of your brain, kind of push against other parts of your brain, and it can cause this dementia, forgetfulness. It can cause weird walking, also known as ataxia, and urinary incontinence, just kind of peeing randomly.
So basically, because this pressure builds, it messes up with the functioning of the brain.
The brain is so delicate, even like 4 minutes without oxygen can lead to brain damage. So you can imagine this pressure going on the brain, hitting it against the skull, which is immovable. Can cause this problem. It's a slow process. We don't really know how it occurs either.
Yeah, I was going to say slow process. Is it heralded by headaches or anything like this?
No. The most common symptom is the mental status stuff and the walking stuff. It looks like people are limping, and you're like, are you limping? Are you hurt? Maybe that's a signal that you should get attention.
Do these patients know that they're limping?
Not necessarily.
Wow.
Usually others notice it.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I've seen it a couple times in the emergency department. Somebody comes in with something, they're a little off. The family says, oh, if you get a CAT scan, and it's pretty obvious there's something wrong because there's so much fluid proportionally. And then you diagnose it by doing a lumbar puncture. And there are treatments, but no medical treatments, only surgical.
So thinking short-term memory, again, gait, equilibrium, these sorts of things.
Yeah, gait, equilibrium, memory, and then urinary incontinence.
That sounds a lot like Alzheimer's. It sounds like Parkinson's. Are they all under the same umbrella?
Well, a lot of them, sometimes this is a precursor to Alzheimer's, unfortunately, so a lot of people are worried about that. But if you go too long with this, it could be permanent. And people sometimes put shunts in there. A shunt would be like a little tube they put in your brain, kind of drain the liquid. Takes a short bit of time, a half-hour procedure, but a lot of complications could occur with that because the shunt goes in there, goes around through your neck, and then it goes into your abdomen.
Holy smokes.
Tell me about it, right?
Yeah.
So I've done lumbar punctures on people in the emergency department, and they say, oh my God, this is the first time I've walked without, normally in months because the fluid comes off. It's kind of fascinating.
Is it misdiagnosed a lot?
Oh, absolutely. It's very rare. Billy Joel is about the right age. He's in the 70s. It occurs in about 0.2% of the population, but the people who get it in their 70s or 80s, it's much higher.
And you mentioned treatment, lumbar puncture and the shunts. Is there anything else as far as treatment? Anything that's, let's say someone comes in the early stages as opposed to the late stages. How does that treatment differ?
The treatment basically is to remove the fluid. So that's the bottom line. If you do a lumbar puncture and it goes away and the patient feels better, then you say, hey, the next time you get this, we'll probably do something more definitive. When I say we, a neurosurgeon would do that.
Yes. It sounds like it's reversible then.
It could be potentially reversible, yes, as long as it's not gone too far. His doctors told him not to listen to loud music, not to play on stage. I don't know if that's the right message, because I wish it was that easy to say that exacerbates it and that causes it. We don't really know.
So you're not even sure if that exacerbates it either?
Not really, no. We know that if you've had a prior stroke, if you've had things like Alzheimer's, that you're more prone to get it, but we don't know if his kind. You can only know what's written about, and what's written about is that he just has the idiopathic one that we don't know.
Yeah, and you kind of referred to this earlier, but again, risk factors. Do we know any kind of risk factors here?
Getting older, having had prior neurological problems such as God forbid, brain tumors or strokes or blood removed from your brain.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow. So
pretty crazy.
I was going to, but Bill, we don't know anything about Billy Joel's health system.
I Googled it before I got here, and they say he's stable and wants to tour again because that's his passion. So that's a good sign.
Do you think he is going to tour again?
I hope so. I saw him tour last time here with Stevie Nicks, and he did not get up. He got up. This is the most he did the whole time. So he just sat at the piano the whole time.
Okay, could that have been, I hate to diagnose here,
I know.
But could that have been an indication that maybe things weren't all that strong?
It could have, because he was only like 73, 74, and he said that he was just tired, and he says he's going to move around, but just move around in his seat. He was still amazing.
I mean, because it's interesting how I never heard of NPH before Billy Joel, never heard about Lewy body dementia before Robin Williams. We're hearing about an awful lot of rare conditions with superstars.
Yeah. I think it's terrible that anyone gets these bad diseases, but it's good because it makes a public awareness, because then people will come in and get seen sooner. So you got to look the good with the bad.
All right, as far as overall health conditions are concerned, we've talked about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and yesterday we had a story about how pickleball is helping Parkinson's patients. And are we learning more? It seemed like Alzheimer's was kind of plateaued, and we just didn't. Does it seem like things are moving as far as intelligence on these levels?
I think, here at ASU we're doing lots of research on it, and I think diet, exercise, keeping the mind moving, it seems to be really helpful.
Even for something like NPH?
Well, for Alzheimer's.
For Alzheimer's, yeah.
Yeah.
But even for something like NPH, I would imagine exercisers is still a bit of an elixir.
Always a good thing.
Yeah. All right. Dr. Frank LaVecchio, again, ASU College of Health Solutions. If we see Billy Joel playing again, we know that everything worked out pretty well.
That's right. The piano man.
There we go. Good to have you here.
Good to have you.
And that is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.